Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Lifelong Learning Committee of the 4th of November. And to those who are perhaps watching this on a live stream, can remind members and officers to mute their microphones throughout the meeting unless you're speaking, and would advise everyone that, as is now standard procedure, it's being streamed live and is also recorded to be available to view on YouTube via the council website following the meeting. Can I ask Charlotte Irons to take a roll call of those attending today's meeting and advise of any apologies, please?
Convener, it's Christina Flynn here. I'll take the roll call this morning. We have apologies from Councillor Purvis and Councillor Stewart is substituting. We also have apologies from Mrs Giles, Miss Weston and Miss Moran. Members, when I call out your name, please confirm if you are present. Councillor Anderson.
Present.
Councillor Baird.
Present.
Councillor Duff.
Present.
Councillor Forbes.
Present.
Councillor McDade.
Present.
Councillor McEwen.
Present.
Councillor Pover.
Present.
Councillor Rebeck.
Present.
Councillor Reid. I'll come back to Councillor Reid. Councillor Sarwar.
Present.
Councillor Shires.
Present.
Councillor Simpson.
Present.
Councillor Stewart.
Here.
Jack Bell. I'll come back to Jack. Andy Charlton. I'll come back to that one. Adrian Ferguson. Martin Gowdy.
Present.
Audrey Macaulay. Dean McBride. I'll go back to Councillor Reid. Is Councillor Reid in yet?
Councillor Reid has advised me he's having problems accessing.
Okay, we'll wait for well, we'll record Councillor Reid when he comes into the meeting. That's the end of the roll call.
Thank you, Christina. Can I ask if there's any declarations of interest in respect of the business on today's agenda? Nope. Thank you very much, which takes us on to the minutes of previous meetings. Can we agree the minute of the Lifelong Learning Committee of 26th of August?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Can we note the minutes of the meetings of the Joint Negotiating Committee of 26th of May and also the special meeting of the 23rd of June?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Before we move on to the papers, I think I would just like to take a moment just to express our thanks to all of our staff within Education and Children's Services, particularly those who are on very much the front line just now in terms of managing our our schools and our early learning settings, and just right across the service to everybody from those in offices and right up to those that are teaching children and supporting families. I don't think we say thank you often enough, and right now I think our thanks truly are sincerely meant. So we would ask Sheena Devlin and Jackie Pepper if they would take our thanks back to all of the members of staff across the council.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Which takes us on to item 4, which is the report on Abernight Primary School and the scoping report that was agreed from the last meeting. Can I invite Sheena Devlin to introduce the report, please? Thank you.
Good morning and thank you, Convener, and thank you very much for those kind words of thanks in your introduction there, and we will be sure to pass those on to all staff concerned. That's much appreciated. Good morning, committee. By way of introduction for this report, I would like to just remind colleagues and committee members that at the last meeting of Lifelong Learning Committee on the 26th of August, the committee requested that a scoping report which outlines all possible options for a catchment review to build a sustainable role at Abernight Primary School at the earliest opportunity including looking at the possibility of a nursery be brought back to this committee. This report therefore sets out proposed principles on which any catchment review could be based, considering the location of Abernite Primary School and its adjoining primaries. The report also details a number of factors which will be investigated through the options appraisal. The report reflects the interdependency of the catchment review and the establishment of a nursery in terms of school capacity, and this has been taken into account in the development of the proposed options. In accordance with previous options appraisals, the project team will carry out a pre-consultation exercise. Parents and carers and prospective parents and carers, staff and children affected by any of the proposals will of course be consulted with. It is planned to bring the completed options appraisal to this committee in May 2021 or as soon as possible thereafter. This would then allow any statutory consultation on the catchment to be completed in time for registrations for August 2022. There are a number of officers here this morning, Convener, who will be able to answer any questions in relation to this paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. Can I invite elected members and others to members of the committee to put a Q in the chat box if you want to ask a question, please. Councillor Rebeck.
Thanks, Convener. I know there are often reasons and good reasons why we don't do dual catchments. I'm wondering whether we have considered doing a dual catchment within Stewart or not. As I say, I do understand there's very good reasons why sometimes that's not practical, but I'm just wondering if we've given that any consideration. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you. Would that be a question for Sheena, for Carol or Karen Reid?
Karen
Robertson,
Robertson to be able to answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you for your question, Councillor Rebeck. The situation regarding a dual catchment area has been considered. However, the scope of what we've been asked to do in terms of creating a sustainable role for Abernite, a dual catchment area would not potentially create any certainty about which pupils might attend in the future, as there would be no obligation for pupils to attend Abernite Primary School. So in trying to determine a sustainable role, we would be looking at pupils who would be destined to attend Abernite in a dual catchment area wouldn't provide any certainty. The situation within Perth and Kinross currently is that we have one dual catchment area which serves primary schools, and the circumstances around that is the dual catchment area and the schools that are served by that are both large primary schools, one a stream and a half and one a double stream school, and of a similar size. And whilst its dual catchment area is densely populated with families, it's geographically very small, and all the families living within that dual catchment area are within the statutory walking distance to both schools. It is considered that a dual catchment area could potentially disadvantage pupils who live close to Abernite, who may want to go to Abernite. So in a situation where if there was a dual catchment within Stewart, as you have mentioned, and the school filled up with pupils from in Stewart Village who would be entitled to attend, then a situation could arise that pupils living close to Abernite who would want to go there may not be able to be enrolled and would then be required to attend in Stewart, as that would be their catchment school. The other scenario also is that if that happened, it could create quite a lot of uncertainty for parents, because children who were already in the school, there may not be the possibility to accommodate siblings, given that the schools are significantly different in size. Thank you.
Well, Karen, thanks for that answer. I do appreciate the detailed nature of it, and I do understand that dual catchments are very complicated sometimes. I can perceive a situation, for example, where somebody might live further away from Abernite towards in Stewart, but they might have a sibling already at Abernite, and therefore they might take preference over somebody who was nearer, for example. So I do understand that that's complicated. I'm just trying to establish, given the history of Abernite, that we we've considered every option, but I do appreciate your answer. Thanks very much for that.
Sorry, I'm having problems with my mute button again. Councillor Anderson, followed by Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, convener. I have two questions, if it's okay to ask two questions to officers. Is that quite all right?
Yeah, I think I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. The first question is there any possibility that we could look at the A90 being a barrier? And I don't know if there is much children that go to Inchture and maybe St Mary's that actually have to get across the A90. It'll probably be by school transport anyway, but is there any reason we couldn't look at that being one of the ways to look at the catchment? That's my first question.
Convener, I think, if I may, Carol Taylor would be best placed to answer that question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Yes, in the last catchment review that we looked at for Abernight and came to committee with, we did use the A90 as a barrier. It makes lots of sense in terms of the travel for the pupils, but also both Inchture and Longforgan are pretty much on the A90, so the children that are to that side of the A90 are within Inchture and Longforgan settlements anyway.
And my second question, thank you for that. My second question refers to the proposal for the two options for nursery. The second option is quite a chunky cost, 800,000. It's mentioned on page 19, 3.3. Is this a traditional build and separate from the school? And if it is, has there been any consideration to a modular building? If one looks now, modular buildings are very modern, very well insulated and low in carbon footprint, and they would be more agile because in the future no one would know exactly how things would go, and modular buildings can be utilised for other things in other locations. So has there been any consideration for that?
Carol, please.
Thank you, convener. Thank you, Councillor Anderson. You are correct, there are actually lots of different types of modular buildings, some of which are very modern and efficient. In discussions we've had with property, and we did consider this as part of our 1140 hours expansion, they prefer to only put them in place for decants or for temporary accommodation. They are initially cheaper in the first instance, but they do require more maintenance over their lifespan. And also, although they are better insulated than they have been in the past, the energy consumption costs are higher. So at the moment, when we require them, they're only for decants or temporary units. And I think that it would be 5 years as a maximum that I think our property colleagues would want to have a modular unit in place. We have them at Errol at the moment for the decant, and we will be moving them to Green Loaning for Braco, but they only really generally do one proper move.
Yeah, okay. As I say, technology is moving on, and some of these things I question, but I'll accept that answer.
Thank you very much, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Forbes, followed by Councillor Simpson.
Thanks, convener. My question's about the no detriment clauses that are within the document, and I'm just looking for clarity on first bullet point that says any option to be considered will not cause a detrimental impact to the school role or sustainability of another small rural school of 70 pupils or fewer. So that would presumably eliminate a change that would take pupils away from most of the schools that are listed there, because, well, not most of them, but certainly things like Kettons and Calais. Am I reading that correctly?
Convener, I can come in there.
Thank you.
And Karen Robertson would be able to assist if I miss anything out. But fundamentally, Councillor Forbes, what you've articulated there is correct. We are very much mindful of the need, the requirement not to have a detrimental impact on other small rural schools. And you're right in terms of the role of a number of other rural schools. We would not want to see a detrimental impact in relation to those. So not all of the schools that are being considered would fall into that category, but a number of them would, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson, please.
Thank you very much, Convener. This is rather a hypothetical question, but if during the pre-consultation we don't find, and I suspect we won't find, an increase to the school role, because I'm not convinced there's a school role out there, to be honest. If we find that that is not the case, when would it come back to this committee to decide whether to continue or not?
Councillor Simpson, we would be seeking to bring a paper back in May 2021 with the outcome of the processes that we would go through.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart, you've indicated you've got a couple of questions.
Thanks, Convener. I think my first question is around educational benefit in section 2.3 of the report. It's the second last bullet point. There should be no adverse pupil impact in terms of educational benefit in accordance with the requirements of the relevant Act. The report helpfully provided a link to the August 2018 committee report, which my reading of it suggests that there's an automatic assumption that educational benefit is greater in a larger school than it is in a small rural school. So I wonder if educational benefit, but that is contradicted, if you like, by the lived experience of the parents who've made placing requests which fulfil more than 50% of the places at the school, if I'm reading the report correctly. So in terms of educational benefit, what is officers' understanding of how that principle would be taken into account? Can we assume that educational benefit is not necessarily for every pupil, i.e. one size doesn't fit all? Educational benefit is not necessarily for every pupil greater in the larger school, and that for some pupils and parents it's better in the smaller rural school.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Sheena, is that one for you?
I can certainly start, and I know that Sharon Johnson will also be able to contribute, as would Karen Robertson. Councillor Stewart, it's not the position that there is an assumption that educational benefits are automatically greater because of the size of a school. Across Perth and Kinross's committee will know we have a range, quite a diverse range in fact, of size of schools, from very, very small to very, very large primary schools, and it is not the case that we as officers consider that the educational benefits are automatically greater or more likely to be in effect in a larger school. We know that the educational learning experience for children and young people across all of our schools can be very, very good, and it's not just about the size of the school. In fact, there's a range of different research papers available that demonstrate the factors that most contribute to a high quality education. And there comes a point where actually size of school, that there's not conclusive evidence because of a range of other factors that would also come into play at the same time. So it's very hard to single out size of school as being a significant contributing factor at certain points of size of schools. So in terms of education benefits, just to say there is not an assumption around that. And in terms of trying to set out education benefits, it's about trying to be factual about what are the opportunities that can be afforded depending on the different circumstances and the different characteristics of different schools. Perhaps Karen or Sharon would also wish to add to that answer, convener.
Thank you. Sharon?
Thank you, convener. Just to add to what the Executive Director has said about the statutory consultation and the requirement to consider educational benefits, as Sheena quite rightly says, we have a large number of small schools within Perth and Kinross, and we would argue that we provide an excellent educational experience in all of them. When we look at the statutory consultations, we are required to look at the educational benefits of delivering curriculum for excellence within the school. And what we need to do is to look at the benefits of one school as opposed to another school under a statutory consultation. And what we have to consider there is that where we do have a very small school, we have to consider how we deliver curriculum for excellence in that small school, as opposed to the educational benefits of providing that in a larger school. Now, that has nothing to do with parental choice. That's really just about how we deliver the curriculum, and the things that we need to consider when we set out educational benefits within a formal statutory consultation document are things such as transitions and what the transition process would be like, how we deliver the full range of curriculum for excellence experiences and outcomes. So, for instance, thinking about the physical, the social, the emotional and the well-being experiences that children can have within each of the schools. And in the case of very small schools within Perth and Kinross, we recognise that it's going to be very difficult if you've got a very small peer group to experience the full breadth of curriculum for excellence, where you do not have opportunities to learn with a wide range of your peers. So what we do is that we make sure that where there are very small schools, we provide those experiences. So, for example, within Abernight, we have made links with Inchture Primary School so that each stage within Abernight Primary School have the opportunities to experience after school clubs or lessons in Inchture with peers from another school so that they can access that breadth of experience.
Thank you for that.
Okay,
Councillor Stewart, did you have additional questions?
Yeah, those answers are quite reassuring. Just on 6.3 of the report, there's reference to, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but now that the closure option has been removed for 5 years, parents or carers may look differently at sending their children there. So I just wondered, in terms of the numbers, how many current placement requests are there out of Abernight into adjacent areas, and how much planned family size of accommodation, house building is there in the area around Abernight that might provide an incoming population who want, or parents or carers who wanted to send, who would have that option?
So would that be one for Carol Taylor and Karen Robertson?
Yes, convener, thank you.
Thank you, convener. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. placing requests, the information that I have is since 2007, there have been 15 placing requests into the school and 17 placing requests out of the school. So they kind of balance each other out over a number of years. In relation to house building, I'm not aware that there is house building in the Abernight catchment area. There will be house building in the Inchdeer catchment area. I think it's at Moncur Farm, and it may be affordable housing. And I think it is on the side of the A90. That is on the Abernight side of the A90.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Forbes, you've got another question, but you've already had one, so I'll take you after the other people, if that's okay. So that's Councillor Pover, please.
Sorry, convener, it was actually a comment I was going to make.
Oh, sorry, I should have read it there. Sorry.
No, it's fine, it's absolutely fine. Thank you.
Councillor McDade.
Thank you, convener. Yes, I've got a couple of questions. The first one is around 2.1 in the annex of the paper, where it says the council also required to identify revenue resources in the region of 40,000 annually to cover staffing and resources. This is in relation to a nursery provision. Would that not be recovered in full by the 1140 hours provided by the Scottish Government? That's my first question. And my second question, I can give you them both now, is obviously it states who the stakeholders will be, but it doesn't detail, for example, how we will consult with the parents. I think any parents watching this will want to know a bit more detail about how we plan to consult with them. So if we could give a bit more context to that, that would be helpful.
Thank you for that. Sheena, who would be best to advise about the nursery costs for?
I think Sharon would be able to talk about the staffing, and certainly Carol or Karen, probably Karen would be able to answer the question around the consultation. Convener, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. In relation to the costs of the nursery, we didn't have, within our expansion plan, a nursery planned for Abernight, so there is no set budget for the staffing within Abernight nursery should we choose to build it. So we would need to look for that funding, and we would certainly look for it within the early years expansion plan.
Sorry, can I just clarify? So I understand it wasn't in our initial bid to government, but are you saying that we would now go back to the government to it essentially as part of our offering? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, Councillor McDade, what we would do is we would look at the funding that we have to cover our early years provision across Perth and Kinross, and look to see how we would fund the additional requirements at Abernight Nursery. We would not need to go back to the Scottish Government for that. We just need to manage our budgets.
Okay, thank you.
And the second question, Carol Taylor, please.
Thank you, convener. Thank you, Councillor McDade. Obviously, in those times, we're going to have to consult with parents differently from what we have done previously, where we did drop-in sessions and kind of one-to-one meetings. It will be primarily online or by telephone. It will be a questionnaire and a conversation. We've been already in discussions with Dundee City Council, who've been carrying out a statutory consultation actually at this time. So there are lots of things we can do to, maybe videos and interactive maps and things like that to make it as clear as possible as we can to parents. We will also use the website to, update any information and queries that people have raised that are common queries, so that people are aware of what other people have been asking. So it's kind of, we just started thinking about it really, but and we don't plan to start it until January. So we've got lots of thoughts about how to make it as easy and accessible as we can to people, and also we're engaging with other councils in considering how we might do that.
Thank you for that, Carol. Further questions, Councillor Baird followed by Councillor Forbes.
Thank you very much, Convener. My question relates to the possible provision of a nursery. Am I right in thinking that nurseries normally don't really fall into catchment areas and parents have the right to send their child to any nursery, and also that does not really guarantee a continuation at that same school as where the child attended nursery? So this may not help to increase the numbers at school. Is that correct? Thank you.
Councillor Baird, that's correct.
Sharon, did you have further comment on that, or?
No, that was exactly the answer I was going to give, Councillor Sires. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very succinct answer.
Councillor Forbes, please.
Thank you, Convener. I hope you don't mind. I've got two questions all rolled up into one topic. It's back to what Councillor McDade was asking about, which is the consultation. So there are 6 options. I can't think of anything other than the 6, but would the community be allowed to throw in a 7th or an 8th or a 9th option into the pot if during the consultation something else that you haven't thought of comes out?
Councillor Forbes, during the pre-consultation phase, that's the kind of thing we would be looking to hear, what other options over and above those that have we've been asked to go out to pre-consultation on as a result of this committee. If there were other options there, then we would want to listen to what those were and understand any viability about those and investigate those, yes.
Thank you. That's me, Councillor Shires. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No further questions. In moving the report, I think some
apologies. Sorry. I had indicated that I'd like to make a comment if that's possible.
So you have. I've just noticed that. Sorry, there seems to be some kind of time delay going on with my chat function.
Yeah, I've got the same thing here as well, so apologies. I really just wanted to add a little bit to what Carol had said around the consultation. She mentioned that Dundee City Council are currently undertaking a statutory consultation, and they are holding, if you like, virtual meetings. The Scottish Government are currently engaged in looking at some revised advice and guidance for local authorities in terms of how they can safely undertake what might have been the more traditional and expected consultation events. And so we will of course be guided by that advice and guidance once that is published as well, and that may help give us some different options that perhaps we hadn't considered up till this point to include in that process. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheena. That's also given me time for my chat function to catch up. So I'm noticing that there's a couple more questions here. Councillor Stewart, you've indicated a question, and Councillor McDade, you've indicated a question also. So I'll take Councillor Stewart first, please.
Thanks, Convener, and thanks for indulging with a further question. It was really just to explore the issue of costs. So in 3.3 of the report, £230,000 to convert one room from change the purpose of one room from a classroom to a nursery seems like a huge amount, and included in that is, I think, if I recall correctly, toilets and a snack preparation area in a school that already has a kitchen. But also, if we were to take the separate option of the £800,000 separate building build, I mean, that's an eye-watering sum of money for a property that would accommodate 8 nursery children. But it does include a plant room when there must be plant on site already, and it includes a staff room when there must be a staff room on site already. And I just wondered whether there's the option that could be explored to dual purpose between the existing facilities and new required nursery facilities to bring either of those or both of those costs down.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Carol Taylor, please.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Councillor Stewart. Obviously, the figures that we provided in the report are not based on feasibility studies for Abernight itself, and we would be taking those further in relation to coming back to committee in May. The 230,000 for inside the school is based on Logie rate. So that is an actual cost of an actual building, which has been done very recently. We have standards to meet in relation to nurseries. Obviously we do in schools as well, but the care inspectorate have to validate or agree to any changes that we make to buildings. So outdoor provisions, very expensive. So basically we have to create an access to the outdoor. We do have to have toilets for the children, which aren't the same toilets as everyone else, and we do have to have a snack prep. It's pretty well defined in terms of guidelines what we need to do in relation to the building. I don't know, Sharon might be able to add to this, or I think Ben is here as well, but I'll finish off my part. The standalone building, it does need its own plan, it does need its own staff room, it does need its own snack prep. It won't be signed off by the care inspectorate if children have to, and the people who work in the building have to go across to another building within the site. Plant room, it needs its own plant, it will need its own utilities, so it is an expensive building. The smaller the building, obviously the more expensive it is. So a nursery for 8 pupils is very expensive. You could have a nursery for, I'm trying to think, at Inchture the nursery is probably about 2 million and it will do 61 pupils. So it's all a matter of scale. You do need all those things within the building.
Okay, and why was the number of 8 pupils picked rather than a larger number? Just, you know, in terms of proportioning the build costs.
I think it was to do with the number of pupils that live in the area and the fact that there isn't a requirement for additional nursery spaces within the Carse of Gowrie. So the reason for building the nursery is to try and create a sustainable role for Abernight and basically to make it, I suppose, commensurate with the size of the pupil population at Abernight.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor McDade, please.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, just quickly on more costs, actually. I wanted to come back to my question earlier in the sense that so we're talking about the capital costs here, and we got a very good answer from the staff about revenue costs could be accommodated within existing budgets. I'm just wondering if we would be able to look at getting the capital cost of, for example, if we had to build a standalone building, whether we could apply for SFC, sorry, not SFC, SFT, yes, getting my various acronyms mixed up here, Scottish Futures Trust funding towards the cost of that. Is there an opportunity to do that if we built it, for example, to the Passive House standards that we have just approved recently for other education buildings?
Is that one for Carol again?
And I'm willing to start, and I'm sure Carol will come in relation to applying to SFT. Councillor McDade, we need to have the totality of capital costs already identified and approved at council level before we could make any kind of bid for what would be up to 50% of revenue costs through an SFT bid. Carol, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
That's correct, Sheena. The only other thing that I'd like to add is that the phase 2 bids we're in at the beginning of this month, so it's unlikely there'll be an opportunity to bid for funding until more funding is announced.
Thank you.
I've got a further question in the chat from Councillor Anderson.
I do apologise for coming in late with this question, but it was just after the past couple of answers given. Can someone enlighten me to why it wouldn't just be an extension onto the existing building rather than a standalone building? Is there restrictions at the school that would stop an extension, or is it because funding wouldn't? We couldn't cover applications for funding if it was not a standalone? Can someone enlighten me to that?
One for you, Carol.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. Thank you, Councillor Anderson. We haven't actually looked at the possibility of an extension and whether it is feasible or not. Generally, extensions are more expensive than standalone buildings just because of having to obviously attach themselves to it, but also what generally happens is that you have to upgrade the rest of the building in relation to the extension. So it's potential that doing an extension would mean rewiring and replacing the heating system within Abernight. So generally they are more expensive. I have to say that property do prefer us to do an extension, but they are more expensive, and what we're trying to do is kind of keep the cost to a minimum in relation to this build.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, I know. I would like to see some figures produced before. I think it would be good to see how these figures are arrived at, and maybe that's something for the future if we keep going on with the options. But I'm ending up in a comment, so I'll leave it in the now and I'll leave it for a comment.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. I'm not noticing any further questions in the chat box as comments. Oh, Sheena, you have a comment on that?
Just to reassure Councillor Anderson that when we do bring back the paper in May, then there will be much more detailed finance figures included in that for committee's full consideration. At this point in time, what we've been able to do is give outline figures based on actual builds of similar styles, and obviously scaled up, scaled down as appropriate, because we wouldn't be seeking to replicate a building the size of the one in Stewart, for example, Abernight. But those are indicative figures to give an outline consideration. I have to say, my reaction on seeing the figures was probably the same as members of the committee. But when we do look at what it has cost at Logie rate and the planned costs around in Stewart, then the indicative figures we've given you are based on actual examples currently underway in Perth and Kinross. But yes, there would be much more detailed costings. And what we can include, if this would be helpful for committee, is of course to look at what a cost of an extension to the existing school building would be if that was a possibility to do, given the land around about the school. So absolutely, Councillor Anderson, it would be more detailed when we bring the paper back.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Just to reassure you, Councillor Anderson, I think we all asked those questions because obviously, you know, we want to get an understanding about how the costs were arrived at also. So, yeah. Okay, so I've got no further questions appearing in my rather slow chat function this morning. So I'll move on to moving the report, keeping it fairly brief, but just to thank officers for the work that's gone in between August and now to bring this scoping report forward, to thank elected members for the questions, and to importantly to make sure that the principles that are outlined in the paper at 2.3 are taken into consideration as we move forward, and that the options on outlined at 6.4 on page 20 are those that could be explored at this stage, and that obviously we'll look forward to the engagement with the school community and others around the Abernight area as we move forward, and we'll look forward to the paper returning to committee for further consideration. Can I ask Councillor Duff if he'll second the paper?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I think the report sets out very clearly the principles by which we will undertake the catchment review. Among other things, I'm sure that we'd all agree that the outcome should not be detrimental to any other small rural school, or cause adverse impact in terms of any pupil's educational benefit. And as we've heard, a range of other options may be forthcoming from the consultation. I think it's we should recognise that the report's authors, Carol Taylor, Karen Robertson, and the other officers involved have done an amazing job to be able to bring this report forward today, given the prevailing circumstances and the additional workloads which all of our officers are under these days. I think we also need to acknowledge that depending on the direction of the pandemic over the coming months, the timetable could be difficult to meet, and officers will, I know, do all they can to deliver the completed options appraisal report on time. But I think we do need to be alert to the possibility of that being adversely affected by matters out with our control. I'm happy to second the report.
Thank you, Councillor Jaffin. I think probably right to thank staff within the council for seeking, further advice from other local authorities that are also, facing up to trying to carry on their business in these unusual circumstances as well, and that's very welcome. Okay, so that moves us on to the comments section. I've got a number of comments, but just if anyone else wants to put a C in the box, and I'll try and find you in the chat. Councillor Povert, followed by Councillor Anderson, please.
Thank you very much, Convener. I'd also just like to thank officers for a very comprehensive scoping report, and also to say that the increase of the catchment area is definitely the priority, and it's important that we work together to achieve this aim effectively, but also that nursery provision needs to remain on the table for future consideration. So thank you very much, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Povert. Councillor Anderson, please.
Yes, thank you very much. As far as the catchment is concerned, I'll leave that to the local members. They have a better understanding of the area than I do. My comments more on if we are minded to go along with a nursery. As I say, things have moved forward a lot with modular buildings. I'm currently looking on another screen, and I won't mention the company because it would be totally unfair, but I say a company here are offering, pardon me, eco-friendly buildings, and are lovely style buildings here. They might be, their cost is the same as what we're getting quoted now, but surely it would be worth going down the road of exploring a building like that, because as I say, a modular building is more agile. It can be used for various things if we wanted it to, etc. So I fully support, and I think it's a great paper we've had today, but I would like to think that that would be included when we're going further into details about a nursery for the Abernite School. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Reid, followed by Councillor McDade, please.
Thank you, Convener. I'm just going to repeat some of the comments, congratulating and thanking all of the officers for producing their scoping report. It really must have been quite challenging to produce this report in such a short period of time under these dreadful situations we're in. So thank you on behalf of everyone, I'm sure, to all those involved in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Councillor McDade, followed by Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, no, I'm pleased to see this paper come forward, and I think it's a good bit of progress for Abernite, and I think it's helpful that we're now having these discussions and officers are preparing for the consultation. I think obviously Councillor Povert has mentioned the importance of a catchment review. However, having my own experience with Loggerate in my ward, which is a wonderful new nursery, it already has 4 children in it, helping lead to the sustainability of its future role. I really don't think we can underestimate the importance of having that early learning provision within a school to allow children to continue on through their catchment school from early learning. So very pleased that we are looking at these options, and I think there's a lot of scope for how we consider these options going forward. So I hope that we'll see huge amounts of consultation by the parents and with the parents of the local children. But very pleased to see this report coming forward. Look forward to seeing updates in the future.
Thank you, Councillor McDade. Councillor Forbes, please.
Thanks, Convener, and just to echo what you said, thank you to all the staff at the council who produced this report in in very quick time under the current circumstances that they're all working in. But I like a lot of other people, I have to say, I was absolutely gobsmacked at the £800,000 cost for a building that will hold just 8 people. It's my view that that option should be eliminated pretty early on. And I may well be wrong about this, and I know it's a convention officers wouldn't correct anything in comments. I'm happy to be corrected if I am incorrect, but I believe that would help the situation at Abernight, because by reducing the capacity of the school, it will actually make it easier to get the school to within that magical percentage of its capacity. And the other thing I'd like to say is, like Councillor Paulbry, I represent the entire Carsegowrie, and I know that Longforgan and Instewart are 2 of the schools that may well be affected by this. So I think both of us have to be aware of that and take cognizance of that possibility. But thank you to all of the officers for the work on this report, and I very much look forward to seeing it progress.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Councillor Stewart, please.
Thank you, Convener. I would just like to say that in terms of the educational benefit to the children, the first question I asked, I'm very reassured that there are that officers will recognise that there are, or do recognise that there are educational benefits and to smaller rural schools in some respects, and clearly that is borne out by the increase in placing requests and the increase in roll in recent months. I do think that, like others, I think that the costs are for the nursery are surprising, and I would hope that there would be options for value engineering or pushing the boundaries with the care inspectorate in terms of shared provision. I'm slightly concerned about option 4 and its inclusion, because it is effectively don't increase the catchment area and don't build a nursery, which is a do-nothing option from current state, and I can't see how a do-nothing option would fulfill our responsibility to attempt to increase the school roll to sustainable levels. As a member representing Ward 2, where we have a number of primary schools, including small rural primary schools, abutting with catchment areas abutting the Abernight catchment area, there is a major barrier to including those catchment areas in the any parts of those catchment areas within Abernight, or extending Abernight's catchment area into any of those existing areas, in terms of the actual physical geographical barrier of the Sidlaw Hills, which are lovely to drive over, but not necessarily particularly accessible. But I would just like to point out that in the appendix, some of the assumptions about in the summary column are not, I would question whether they were quite correct. If you look at the map at the end, you can quite clearly see that you can get from Burlton Primary School catchment to Abernight catchment area without going through the Calais catchment area. I know that road very well, up past just past the sort of Pitcairn area. I know that road very well because it's a road I use quite a lot. So I would question that, and I would question some of the, I think some of the assumptions about the Balbeggie Primary School catchment area. So it's just to make a comment that I think if those are being considered, then we just need to review that column for accuracy before proceeding to the pre-consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I think it might be helpful just for reference for all of us, if we could have a copy of the standards for nursery provision. They are very onerous, and it just might be useful for us all as we embark on this to be reminded of the requirements just for our reference. So perhaps officers could help by circulating that following the meeting. I've got a final comment in the box from Councillor Rebick.
Thanks, Convener. I'll just be very brief because I think everything's been said. It is important, however, that I also thank officers for their hard work in this paper, particularly in the current times in which we live. And I agree totally with Councillor Duff that the fight against COVID must take priority in everything that we do here in Perth and Kinross, as it does in Holyrood, in fact. So I completely agree with that comment. But also, I'd just like to back up my colleague. Councillor Pover is absolutely correct that it's crucial that we get the catchment review done properly and thoroughly, but that the option of a nursery provision is kept open. But it is appreciated the work that officers have done on this, and I look forward to seeing what comes out of all these proposals. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Rebick. I noticed that Sheena's put a comment in the chat box about circulating the standards, and perhaps a briefing would be helpful just for us all to have an understanding about that also. So can I ask that we agree to the recommendations in this report?
Agreed.
And thank in advance officers for the work that's going to be done in pretty challenging circumstances, but I'm quite sure that you're more than able to take that on, so thank you in advance. That takes us on to the paper 5, the SQA exams update, and I would invite Sheena Devlin to introduce the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. I'll keep my introduction brief. This report provides the main milestones and outcomes of the 2019-20 SQA assessment diet for senior phase pupils in Perth and Kinross schools. It also details the plans and arrangements that have been made for the current academic year. Of particular note is the point that whilst it is still intended that an exam diet go ahead for hires and advanced hires next year, that is of course subject to change depending on the potential impact on learning of any restrictions that may be required to combat the spread of coronavirus in the weeks and months ahead. There are a number of officers here who would be able to assist me in answering any questions that the committee may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheena. Can I ask if there are any questions? Put a Q in the chat box. I'm not seeing any coming up. Nope. Yep. Councillor Duff. Councillor Duff seems to be having my problems with the mute button.
There we go. I think I'm live now. Thank you, Convener. Yeah, at paragraph 1.2, where it talks about appeals, I noticed that there were 7 appeals in Perth and Kinross this session, which are all still in the process of resolution. Would that be normal, given we're in November this time of year?
I invite Donald McLeod to answer that, please.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Councillor Duff. That would not be normal practice, no. We would normally have appeals resolved by this date. We have a very small number. However, that may not be maybe the case nationally, and it is looking at administrative error in relation to the SQA or the school's administrative error, but that would not be the normal practice. It would be concluded by now.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. I'm on page 38, and I'm going to say right at the start, I may have misread this, but if I can just put my question out for answer. It's 1.9, it's the last bullet point, and it's learners from deprived backgrounds are slightly more likely to have results downgraded from an AC past a D or from D to no award. Is that one of those ones that was picked up in the sort of the correction process and has therefore been resolved?
That Donald to respond.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Yes, absolutely. So in the initial results that were received after amendment by the SQA, it transpired that those from the most deprived backgrounds were more affected than those from the least deprived backgrounds, and that those who had been estimated at a C were changed to a D more than any other result. However, that has been resurrected in the results that were confirmed based on teachers' estimates.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Donald.
Thank you both. I'm not seeing any further cues appearing. So with that, I'll move on to move the report. I think just keep my comments quite brief, but I suppose behind this report are an awful lot of young people for whom this summer must have been unbelievably stressful, you know, right through from March through to August and beyond. And I think we can all remember sitting waiting for the envelope to come through the letterbox with our exam results, and you know, the stress on our young people this summer has just been unimaginable. And I think we would just like to congratulate them all on their achievements in very difficult circumstances. Further to that is also our staff in schools who really had to, you know, there was one thing happening and then something else was happening, and our staff were very much there supporting our young people through that time. Moving on, I note the commitment that should it be necessary to make any further changes to the SQA process, then teachers and school management teams are ensuring consistent and robust process for providing graded estimates. And we recognise that providing that consistency and robustness is also a challenge for staff, and particularly the senior management teams in our schools. So we thank them for those efforts. I think also like to just thank Paul and James, who I presume are the people that put together all of the data here with Donald. The data that we get from officers when you can dig right into it, and I hope we will have the opportunity to continue looking at this exam data, because the 2020 results will then have knock-ons for future years, and it's very important that we do that in order that we can effectively support all our young people. So with that, I'll just move the report, please. Councillor Duffy, seconding.
Thanks, Convener. Yes, I have the authors down as David McCluskey and Paul Davidson, but James may also been involved in that.
Okay,
so
sorry.
we thank all of the officers and the Executive Director for bringing the paper forward to the committee this morning. As you've said, the events of early 2020, which brought about the situation, were extremely challenging for everyone, for pupils, staff, parents and the local authority. And I think we should take the opportunity to express our thanks to Mrs Devlin and her team of head teachers and officers for their immense efforts in delivering the exam result estimates to the SQA on time and under great pressure. And I'm happy to second the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Can I ask if there's any comments, please? Councillor Rebick.
Thank you again, Convener. Councillor Duff very eloquently just said what largely I was going to say. To be perfectly honest, I think what happened in the spring was probably the most challenging thing that's ever happened in Scottish education, certainly in my lifetime, and we cannot thank staff enough for what they did, whether it's the head teachers, whether it was teachers trying to do home learning, or whether it was the staff in our child assessments, not the child assessment centres, the special hubs that we set up. All the staff on all levels need to really be thanked, and it's important to note as well that it was very challenging for pupils, as has already been said, and I think credit to the young people that we have, that I think ultimately our students did get the results that they deserved eventually, notwithstanding the difficult times. And I do think in terms of opportunity going forward, it does allow us actually to have a broader conversation about how we evaluate and assess the hard work of our young people. I know personally that I passed higher physics and wasn't able to change a plug, and Curriculum for Excellence is designed so that that doesn't happen. Students do have a deeper understanding of the subjects that they study now, and I do think whilst an exam diet will always be part of that evaluation, I do think it allows us the broader conversation, and it maybe shouldn't provide 100% of that evaluation. And I think I look forward to a conversation broader and how we move forward. But again, just thank you to the staff that were involved and the pupils in what was a very challenging time, solely caused by a pernicious virus. But thanks, convener.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Ribbett. Councillor Forbes, followed by Councillor Baird.
Thanks, convener. Like yourself, I can also remember those days of sitting by the post box waiting for the envelope to drop through, and actually in my case it was always I ended up having to cycle down the road from Scout Camp to the nearest telephone box. Some people will remember what a telephone box was. But I just want to pick up on one thing, and I'm looking at the table B2 where grades were changed, and we've got down A to C was 0%, which is technically correct, although it does actually represent 23 people. And for those 23 young people, that must have been horrific to have expected an A and be given a C. I'm delighted that some of those have been reversed. So we can't, as Councillor Revick said, lose sight of the fact that behind every one of those is a young person who was expecting a result and didn't, in some cases, get what they expected. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Councillor Baird.
Thank you very much, convener. I too would like to pay tribute to everyone involved in the teaching of our young people, but I think we can't forget all the families and mums and dads and carers who had suddenly to do this home learning, and maybe made them all realise that being a teacher is just not an easy job. It's quite challenging having to keep youngsters motivated. So I think credit must be paid to all the families who really thought maybe they learned something about education as well that they hadn't known before. So pay tribute to everyone who's helped these youngsters get the grades they wanted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baird. I'm not seeing any further comments. Councillor McEwen has put a comment there as a parent. Thank you, and indeed, not seeing any further comments. So with that, can we agree the recommendations in the report?
Agreed.
I'm going to hand over to Councillor Duff to take the next two papers. I'm not sure if everyone's happy to continue, if you want to have a brief comfort break. A 5-minute break, or are we all happy to continue? Just continue.
Yeah.
Fine, let's get on. Thank you. I'll hand over to Councillor Duff.
Okay, thank you, convener. We now moved on to item 6 on the agenda, which is the Education and Children's Services Annual Performance Report. I'd like to invite the Executive Director, Sheena Devlin, to introduce it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. I will once again keep my introductory remarks brief, just to say that this report presents the annual performance report for 2019-2020 for Education and Children's Services. It summarises service performance over the period from April 2019 to March 2020 in delivering better outcomes for everyone in Perth and Kinross, and it also reports on performance against our key performance indicators. We have a wide range of officers here today from different parts of Education and Children's Services who will endeavour, along with myself, to answer any questions that you may have about any aspect of the report. Thank you, Vice Convener.
Thank you, Ms Devlin. Are there any questions on the report? Councillor Simpson.
Thank you very much indeed, Vice Convener. I'm looking at page 10, the health and well-being strategy, and I note, colleagues won't be surprised to see here, but I'm noting here that no particular mention or emphasis of active travel, which is a bit disappointing, because surely if we are interested in the health and well-being of the pupils within our control, never mind ourselves, we should be looking to use every socially distanced opportunity we have, and cycling, scooting, running or walking to school seems to be an ideal opportunity to make the very best of what is a challenging situation. And I hope that perhaps somewhere in the course of next year we can include this when we're looking at the health and well-being of the young people in our care. And I just wondered if there are any plans to do something about that.
Mrs Devlin.
Councillor Simpson. Thank you very much, Vice Convener. Councillor Simpson, just to say that whilst there might not be mention in here in terms of performance in relation to 2019-20, It doesn't mean to say that there hasn't been good practice undertaken, because there has been, and what we have seen since schools resuming in August of this year are a number of children and young people engaging in a range of different means of active travel to and from school, which has been very welcomed. It's certainly something we can provide an update on. In terms of the performance report, what we've reported on are things that we had actually identified in our improvement plan to report on, and that would explain the absence from this particular report, but very happy to consider how we provide you with that information in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pova.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. I'd just like to refer to page 11 of the report under the heading Perth Kinross Child Poverty Action Plan, and the part that says some schools have undertaken cost of the school day training and have implemented measures to reduce the financial demand on families. And I just wondered if an officer could expand on that, just to give a little bit more detail.
Councillor Pover, I'm happy to commence and answer, but I know that my colleague Sharon Johnson and her team will have far more of the detail around that. But going back a couple of years ago, we engaged with the Poverty Commission, and they came and presented to one of our all-head teacher days, in the days where we were able to all gather together and have such days, and we'll look forward to being able to do that again, hopefully in the not too distant future. And from that point on, a number of schools really went back to look at all the different costs, obvious and less obvious, that were asks of children, young people and their families, and sought to reduce those. So, for example, you know, several dress down days over the course of a school session might not seem terribly much, but when you add that up, particularly if there's several children and young people in one family and it's a couple of pounds a go, that fairly adds up. And so people have been quite creative about making sure that they can still have such days, but without the expectation of financial contribution. Also, school trips was another one where people were looking at, you know, a school trip here or there. Again, in isolation might not seem much, but if perhaps in the secondary school different departments were having different trips for different reasons, then a number of young people may have found themselves excluded. Although what we've always found is that schools have been very good at finding discreet ways to support children, young people and their families without it being at all in any way stigmatised. But we have gone back just to look again at those asks and understand what strain that might be putting on particular families and how that might exclude different groups. So there's been significant work done there. We looked quite specifically at the cost of school uniform. And of course, we know that the grant that is available if you're entitled to free school uniform has been increased. And we know that that is now standardised across the country, because before that was variable, and that has also been a considerable support to a number of families. So those are just a few of the ways that I hope give you some comfort and reassure you that this is something that we have been taking seriously, but that we continue to work on, because this is really important that we make sure nobody is excluded from anything that might benefit their learning experience or their experience from being at school just because of financial situation. I'm noticing in the chat that Fiona Mackay, who's here, will be able to provide you with more information if that's helpful just now, Councillor Pover.
No, that's actually very helpful. Thank you very much. And I'm really delighted to see that as part of the report.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, Councillor Rebick.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I have two questions, if that's okay. I'll ask them separately because they're not related, and I'm assuming because we're taking paper 6 and 7 together, a question pupil equity fund is appropriate at this point. And that question is probably for Sheena, I suspect, but it's two-partly. One's a factual one. I should know this. I think it's about £6 million Perth Kinross Council have had over the period of this Parliament for Pupil Equity Fund, but I'm just wondering if that can be confirmed. And the broader question, I think, is around the use of that, because My impression in the early days was that whilst it was a nice problem, head teachers were getting quite a relatively large amount of money, and there was a lot of discussion around how to spend that, albeit, as I say, it was a nice problem. As the 5 years have gone on, the impression I get is that they've found really productive and imaginative ways of spending that, and it really has made a difference in closing the attainment gap. But I'm wondering if my experience of the 4 primary schools in my ward is one which is Perth and Kinross wide, really. So that's kind of 2 questions, and I have another one on food insecurity, if that's okay, Vice Convener.
Okay, we'll wait for the answer on this one first. Thank you.
Vice Convener, I think Sharon Johnson would be able to best answer Councillor Rebick's question there.
Thank you. Okay, Sharon, please.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Councillor Rebick, just to answer your first question in relation to the funding that Perth and Kinross get from the Scottish Government for PEF, the total is just over 1.6 million per year. And we are part of the universal offer from the Scottish Government, which means that we don't have any schools that meet the criteria for Scottish Attainment Challenge funding, and we're not an Attainment Challenge authority. So as you say, each school who qualifies because of the numbers of children with free school meal entitlement gets a sum of money. And it would be fair to say that when that money first arrived, our schools really did welcome the funding, but we didn't really have a system that was available to support them in the best use of that funding. And when we presented our Raising Attainment strategy at last committee, we detailed in there some of the ways in which we've tried to support them to make better use of that very welcome funding. And you'll see within the Raising Attainment report a number of interventions that we have taken to ensure that that's the case. Schools were very challenged in terms of identifying who the money should be spent on, and we've supported that through the work of Paul Davidson's team and with the Attainment Advisor to help schools further identify their gaps. We've also provided much more information to schools about the evidence-based interventions that were available and that were showing good impacts across the country, and that has made a huge difference to them. And so therefore this year we have seen that schools have been much more targeted in their approach of the use of the funding, and we're continuing to make sure that that is continued into next year.
Thank you, Sharon, and I note from Mrs Devlin an update that £8 million has been supplied in PEF funding over the last 5 years.
Thanks, Vice Convener, and thanks very much, Sharon. I really appreciated that answer, and it's not like me to underestimate Scottish Government money, so I will make sure that doesn't happen again. So much appreciated. My second question is more related to paper 6 actually, and it's around in page 68, the food insecurity during holiday periods short life working group, which is a long title, but nonetheless the work that group's done has been really valuable and appreciated. But it's just to confirm going forward, I think the emphasis has gone away from holiday hunger clubs to holiday activity clubs at which the kids will be fed, and I think it's important that we just remember going forward that actually in terms of avoiding stigma that it should be about activity clubs with food and not about holiday hunger. So it's just to confirm that will be the strategy that we take forward. Thanks.
Thank you.
Councillor Rebick. Sorry, Convener.
Carry on.
Councillor Rebick, we had some really good examples across different parts of Perth and Kinross, and in fact one at Letham Primary that ran on that basis. St John's was another school where we had a similar approach, and what we also know, of course, is that a number of these activity clubs took place out with school premises and were run and supported by voluntary organisations or third sector organisations. And you're absolutely right, the activity and the ability perhaps to even bring families together for some holiday activity and food as part of that social experience of coming together for enjoyable activity is certainly the model that when we're allowed to continue with that kind of approach, then that's certainly what we'd be seeking to do.
Thank you, Mrs. Devlin. I have one further question from Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Excuse me. On page 17, or in actual fact at the top, the section on partnership working, but actually the paragraph, the first full paragraph at the top of page 18. There's reference to the development of a mental health strategy within the Tayside Collaborative. It may just be the way that I'm reading it, but it's not. I'm not absolutely sure whether the mental health strategy is still in development or has been developed, and I just wondered if anybody could shed further light on that.
Mrs. Devlin.
Apologies, Convener, difficulty unmuting and putting camera on. I think Jackie Pepper or Fiona Mackay would be best placed to answer. I see that Jackie's indicated she'd be able to answer.
Okay, thank you. Jackie, please.
Thank you very much. Just to indicate that only this week I've had the final draft provided to me for consultation and feedback. So and the responses are due back from partners by the 30th of this month, 30th of November, Councillor Stewart. So the mental health strategy is in its very final draft form and should be launched towards the end of the year, early next year. So it's certainly progressed to that extent.
Okay, and will that be going to some committee for at least information?
Absolutely, yes.
To lifelong learning or to somewhere else?
I think the mental health strategy itself will certainly be brought forward to the integrated joint board, but given that there is a substantial section within that in relation to children and young people's mental health, that will be an item of interest to our partnership, the Children, Young People and Families Partnership, and if there are aspects of that that are relevant to the Lifelong Learning Committee, I'm sure that that can be shared here too.
Okay, and one more thing, just one of the issues that I think is pretty well, a problem that is pretty well established is for children and young people, the continuity of mental health support through childhood, teenage years into sort of early adulthood, because generally at some point one stops getting treated as a child and starts getting treated as an adult. Those services are provided differently, but it can be disruptive and upsetting. And I just wondered what the final draft of the mental health strategy has to say in respect of continuity of mental health support and care through childhood, teenage years into early adulthood.
Councillor Stewart, just to indicate that the final draft came into my inbox yesterday, so I couldn't tell you with accuracy what the draft says, but certainly that will be something that we'll be paying attention to locally and along with our partners contributing feedback to those that are responsible for the development of the strategy. So yes, certainly that would be an area that we would have a keen interest in, and certainly particularly for those young people who are entitled to support through to the age of 26 as a result of their care experience. So we will be looking at that closely, but I couldn't accurately say what the strategy says because I only received it yesterday.
Okay.
Thank you. Mrs. Devlin, I think you wanted to comment?
Thank you, Vice Convener. Just to say that for something of this nature about a strategy around mental health and wellbeing for children and young people, there could be merit, Vice Convener, in us undertaking a briefing for not just members of lifelong learning, but perhaps for any elected members who may have an interest in this, and that ability to engage and interact in a very proactive way around a briefing approach might be a helpful approach to take with a paper such as this. And just to pick up on Councillor Stewart's point around the transitions, we're acutely aware of exactly that. So transitions in lots of areas where young people will be receiving services as whilst being classified as a child, young person, and continuing to need that into adulthood. So be that around mental health and well-being or whatever that is, and that will continue to be a focus of an area for us, along with our partners in health and NHS Teesside as well, to look at, and our colleagues of course in the Health and Social Care Partnership in Perth Kinross, about how we can seek to improve the experience for those children and young people and their families in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director. I'm sure elected members would welcome the briefing on the strategy. Thank you. Okay, there are no further questions. I'll move the report. Convener, the report highlights the wide range of projects, policies, performances and plans which have helped this authority to perform well in relation to its targets over that period. I'm pleased to note that the service continues to make good progress in support of vulnerable children and families, raising attainment, improving the quality of life and delivering high quality public services. The report provides details on many imaginative and impactful activities and initiatives, such as the Navigate Learning Provision, which has supported 39 young people with additional support needs to improve their attainment, a programme to eradicate food insecurity during school holiday periods, which saw nearly 4,000 attendances by children from over 700 families at summer holiday activities. They were supported by around 110 community volunteers, and all the children received a healthy, nutritious meal and were entertained into the bargain. And the establishment of the PRAISE team, Primary Raising Attainment and Inclusion Supporting Education team, in January of this year, who within 2 months were working in 9 schools, helping to support 17 children who are looked after at home to be fully participating and achieving within their school settings. Convener, this is a detailed report of the service's work and performance during 2019-20, and I thank Mr Childs, the author and performance officer, for this report. I'm delighted to move its approval. Councillor Shires, will you second? Councillor Shires, are you still with us?
I am. I'm just trying to unmute. Sorry.
That's okay.
Vice Convener. I'm delighted to second this report. It does seem like a year is the report to the end of March 2020, and a lot has happened since then. But actually, this report highlights the very the bedrock stuff that our council does, the embedded work that makes such a difference when it actually comes to the crunch, and we're very much at that point just now. Themes running through this report are the commitment to support young people, children and their families to be resilient and to achieve the best that they can. Some of the highlights in it, the work done through the REACH project, are ongoing support for young carers in partnership with our friends at PCAVs. As Councillor Rebick highlighted, the really important bedrock work that was done in terms of tackling food insecurity during the holiday periods. And I think when I look back on my time in this local authority, that will be one of my highlights. I think will be the afternoon that Councillor Rebick and I spent up at Letham with families, and particularly fathers. That was the thing that stood out to me, the fathers that were there engaged in activities in the peak of the summer holiday period, which we know for families can be extremely difficult. And I think it's something, when this is part of a national discussion, that we in Perth and Kinross should be very proud of, that we took a cross-party approach to this. And during our term as administration, we have delivered projects that actually work in partnership with our families and our communities to tackle the really big problems that families face, and it's something that I hope that we'll demonstrate an ongoing commitment to in the days when we're beyond the pandemic. The report has so many highlights in it, but equally we know that we're in a very challenging time. And another thing I'd just like to pick out is the work that's been done to expand the rollout of our digital strategy. And I know that we have officers there who have really made a massive difference in supporting our frontline staff and teachers to make the most of the need to to upskill themselves and to really get that rolling out. So thanks to all that are involved in, and a very positive report, but very much it's that bedrock for us to build on for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. We'll move to comments. Are there any comments, please? Give it a moment. It seems to be slow coming through. Councillor Rebick.
Thank you again, Vice Convener. This is a really good report, an excellent report, in fact, whether it's on the social work angle or whether it's educationally, and it's to be commended. One thing that strikes me when I'm in schools is that, and I know teamwork's a cliche, but it is true, whether it's our senior management team here in 2 High Street, or what was 2 High Street before COVID, whether it's head teachers, whether it's teachers, whether it's pupil support assistants, janitors, our catering staff, our lollipop men and ladies, everybody contributes to what is a good educational experience in Perth and Kinross. And as I say, it's to be commended. I do think, and I say this with all sincerity, was delighted to see Mr. Chan's latest leaflet having a very much softer tone on education, which I think is appropriate. I will give him the benefit of the doubt, given that he has flip-flopped a little bit between the wards, that the comments would also relate to the schools in my ward in Perth City North. But as I say, I do say that with all sincerity. I think the comments were far better balanced, and it's appreciated. I do also want to commend, because I've said all along that I would commend political opponents where it's appropriate to do so, and I concur with Councillor Shires that one of her highlights will be the support that she's had for holiday hunger or holiday activity clubs as we move forward, and I just want to underline that appreciation for that support. It is important. And lastly, if I may, if I can touch very briefly on the programme for international student assessments this year, the PISAs, which I've been critical of in the past when they've just taken into account exam results. But this year's PISA was more about the ability for pupils to understand and evaluate the learning that they had. And Scottish pupils came out very well in that. It was shown that they were able to understand and appreciate the perspective of others, and they were able to analyse multiple perspectives and options, and they were able to analyse the information that they were given. And indeed, I think it was only Canada and Singapore which came out better than Scotland. So it shows that Curriculum for Excellence is working, and these 2 reports underline the good place that we're in educationally in Perth and Kinross. So I would just like to underline the thanks for staff and to commend very appreciatively these 2 reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rebick. Councillor Sarwar.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Just a brief comment from me to say that I was so pleased to see the Navigate learning provision highlighted in the report, and yourself mentioning it just there under the Raising Attainment Strategy. A few of us in the SNP group were able to visit the facility last year, and we're just so impressed with this great model and the holistic approach that they've taken. And I'd be really grateful if officers could pass on our thanks and congratulations for their dedication of the staff involved and the results that it's bringing. It's really astonishing and brilliant to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sarwar. Councillor Baird.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. My comments will be brief too. I think it's an absolutely excellent report from the play strategy and the new play pods, outside learning, looking after the young carers, etc. It's really, really good. It just shows that this administration does have the well-being of everyone at their heart. So well done to absolutely everyone who's been involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baird. I'm not seeing any further requests for comments, so are we happy to agree the recommendations of the report?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, that takes us on just to the final paper of this morning, which is on the Attainment and Pupil Equity Funding Update for 2020. And I'd like to invite the Executive Director, Sheena Devlin, to introduce this report.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener, and I'll just give you fair warning that this is a slightly lengthier introduction to this paper, if I may. This report provides an update on progress made in Perth Kinross to raise attainment and close the poverty-related attainment gap. It outlines the range of measures implemented to improve performance and monitor progress of improvements, including the use of pupil equity funding to support learners. It also details the measures used to understand performance for all learners, that's the excellence part, and in closing the poverty-related attainment and other gaps, the equity features. It meets the Council's requirement to report on the National Improvement Framework for Education and on the expenditure and impact of the Pupil Equity Fund. In 2019-2020, Perth and Kinross schools were allocated just over 1.6 million of funding, which was allocated directly to schools to enable them to target support where it was most needed. This past academic year has been, to not understate things, a challenging one for obvious reasons, and some areas of performance information are not complete as a result. The focus on this session will be a return to higher degrees of data-led intelligence to inform progress and improvement. A short animated video will be used to highlight the key strengths, such as improvements in literacy and numeracy across all year groups from P1 to school leavers, as well as signs of poverty-related gaps closing. Leaver destinations and post-school participation rates continue to improve, and figures are some of the best across Scotland. Increasingly effective partnership takes place between our schools and colleges, universities, employers and the Developing the Young Workforce Board to prepare young people for the world of work. The video also indicates the areas for continued focus across our schools, which centre on poverty-related gaps in wider attainment areas beyond literacy and numeracy, and also a focus on school attendance. During the course of 2019-20, the Raising Attainment Board was further strengthened, with representatives from across education and children's services becoming members, with a remit to oversee and steer council-wide efforts and to drive performance improvements. An online Closing the Gap Pupil Equity Fund planning tool has been developed in partnership with Education Scotland, which will be piloted during the session by a small group of our schools. It will help schools to carefully plan and track planned interventions and monitor the progress being made over the course of the year. I want to share a small note on exclusions data. Note that the latest figure for exclusions reported here show an additional academic year beyond that reported in the annual performance report, which is focused on the financial year ending March 2020. Figures for the year 2019-20, even adjusting for the time lost during lockdown, show an improvement, in other words a reduction on 2018-19, returning to the long-term trend seen over time. We are now going to share a short animated video with members of the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was very, very helpful piece of film there, very clear and lots of information within it. Is there anything further you'd like to say, Mrs. Devlin?
No, thank you, Convener. Just very happy to take questions, and again, all officers here will be happy to answer any questions, and if there's anything we can't answer, then we'll certainly get that information to members of committee as soon after.
Thank you for that. Okay, I'll open the chat box now for any questions on this report. So, are there any questions? I'm not seeing anything in my chat box at the moment. Just give it a little bit longer. No, not seeing any questions on that, so I'll move then to move the report. Firstly, I'd like to thank our Research and Information Manager, Paul Davidson, and Head of Education and Learning, Sharon Johnson, for the report. It provides members with information in support of the Council's Raising Attainment Strategy, performance, and how we use pupil equity funding to close the poverty-related attainment gap. The report highlights improvements made in a number of areas, the developmental milestones for children in the 27 to 30 month age group, indications of progress in all areas of literacy and numeracy, including school leavers and looked after children. Senior phase attainment continues to be good and above or at the level of our virtual comparators. Poverty-related gaps remain evident but are narrowing slowly. School leaver destinations and 16 to 19 participation rates have improved on their already high levels and are one of the highest figures nationally. In this academic year, head teachers have been provided with nearly £1.7 million of pupil equity funding and have used this funding in a variety of ways to support pupils and families affected by poverty, helping them to achieve their full potential. Convener, the details are set out for members' information and consideration, and I'm happy to move this report. Convener, are you happy to second?
Thank you, Councillor Duff. It's a very positive report, and it's pleasing to note that in the challenging times that coronavirus pandemic has created for our schools, our staff, children and young people, it's very positive to be able to report on what the Council's Raising Attainment Strategy has already been able to do to help pupils achieve their very fullest potential. It's interesting to note that that doesn't just focus on the academic, but very much on the person, and helping those children to be the best person that they can be. We're not at all complacent, however, and there is a lot more that to be done to close the attainment gap further. This paper sets out where we intend to focus to continue making that real difference to young lives. Happy to second.
Thank you, Convener. Are there any comments? Councillor Rebick.
Thanks again, Vice Convener. I know we've touched upon pupil equity funding to some degree in the last paper, but it is important, I think, to say that the attainment gap is real and it's long-standing. I think the barriers to learning and the sometimes subconscious attitudes that exist in our more deprived communities are real and are generations old. They will not be easily shifted. However, pupil equity funding has started to do that, and there are encouraging signs about the attainment gap closing. Frankly, the money is essential, and without it we couldn't do these things. However, it's also important to note that without the hard work of teachers, these things wouldn't happen, and I've seen firsthand the imaginative use that head teachers have of pupil equity funding, and they have to be commended in this as well. So this is a good report and it's appreciated. So I'd just quite like to commend it also. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rebick. I'm not seeing any further requests for comments. Sorry, yes, Mrs. Devlin, I think if members would like, I think it would be good to circulate the link to the film. It would be good to kind of watch it again and take some further, you know, have a further look at the details that was in it. So thank you if you could do that. Councillor Forbes, you're looking to comment.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I just want to follow on from what Councillor Rebick said about Pupil Equity Fund. Obviously, it's great to see some money coming from the Scottish Government. I'm sure he would join me in agreeing that we'd actually like to see an awful lot more money coming from the Scottish Government. But we support anything that gives power to head teachers because they're the people that understand the schools, understand the children and their requirements. So great to see it, but let's have some more money from the Scottish Government. I want to also just pick up on something I was putting a question in the box, but it obviously wasn't getting through to you. But on page 17, it talks about positive destinations for young people. And I believe that a 0 hours contract is regarded as a positive destination. And given that the Scottish Government are always criticising 0 hours contract, that surprises me. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. A great report, and thanks to the staff for all the work they've done on it.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. And as per the convener's chat, I think a wider circulation of the link to all councillors, I think would be best if you could arrange that for us, Mrs. Devlin. Thank you. I'm not seeing any further comments in the chat box, so on that basis, are we happy to agree the report?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay,
Agreed.
thank you. Thank you. That concludes my part, and I'll hand you back to the convener, who may or may not be able to see it. Or I'm not sure if her camera is working or not.
Yeah,
back to yourself, Carly.
My microphone's working now, but my camera's not, so we can't have everything. Just thank you to everyone for participation in the meeting. It's quite a full gamut of papers that have been considered this morning, and we just would reiterate the comments you started off with, that none of this would be achievable without the dedication and commitment of staff right across the council, and it's right and proper that particularly at this time more than ever that we just begin and end our meeting with that note of thanks. So thank you all for your participation today, and I look forward to seeing you on a screen in due course. Thank you very much.